Yeah, we are good to start, Nikki. Like we can start. Yeah.
Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome if you've just joined to Microsoft 365 Saturday, Bangalore 2021. My name is Nikki Chapple. Let's get going with my session today. But before we start, I need to thank all our sponsors, because without the sponsors we'll be unable to run these events. So we've got the list of sponsors there in front of your screen, so we thank them all very much. And today is a virtual event. There's lots of sessions, lots of deep dive focuses, and make sure you can win some exciting prizes, so don't forget to do that. So today is session 6. So it's all about building a Teams creation workflow using Power Automate. So my name is Nikki Chapple. I'm based in the UK. I'm an architecture consultant working for NTT. I spend my time with clients on Microsoft 365, predominantly Teams and Microsoft 365 governance. I have my own blog, so there's a QR code if you want to scan that. That will take you to my website. I do have, I've just posted up actually the detail of this session, because this is quite a small session. We're going to be doing a demonstration, so it's difficult to actually kind of take all the notes. So I've actually written a supporting blog that goes with it, that takes you into that deep dive detail so you can watch it afterwards. So let's get going. So it's all about building a Teams creation workflow process using Power Automate. So the first thing is, well, why not just use the standard Teams creation process? Well, what I've found working with clients is that out of the box, Teams doesn't really provide those governance controls people want. There's limited naming standard. Yes, you can do a naming standard using Azure AD. You can either have a suffix or a prefix, and you can have some text, or you can have details from the user profile. But it is quite limited. You can't say, what type of team is this? Is this a project team or is it an operational team? Duplicate team names. And this is one of the biggest and most annoying features in Microsoft Teams. When you create a team, it will allow you to create a team with a duplicate name, whether you're doing that from the Teams admin portal or by an end user. There's no deduplication on that team name. It will create a team site with the SharePoint site with some 3 random numbers after the name. And the other thing is, only one owner is required. All best practice, states you should have more than one owner, just in case that person leaves the organization. You don't want your team to become ownerless. So always have more than one people. And a lot of organizations have asked me, say, I want an approval step. Well, you can't do that out of the box. But hey, we've got lots of tools in Microsoft 365 where we can actually sort out all of these problems. So let's have a little look and see what we're going to do today. So we need to use 3 standard tools that you have within Microsoft 365. We're going to use a form to capture that data. We're going to use a SharePoint list to store all the information about that Teams creation process. So you've kind of got that audit list of everything. And then we're going to use Power Automate to actually put all of these processes in place, do a duplication check, put an approval process in place, automatically create the team, put things like sensitivity labels on it, and then update the list so you've got a full record of what's happening. So all of this can be done with standard functionality. You don't need to pay for any advanced Power Automate features. It's all out of the box. So things that you will need to consider, however, are, one, as I mentioned, it's standard Power Automate. We're not going to be using any premium features, but you will need to use a little bit of, we'll be using an HTTP call, which under preview with some Graph API. So if you're not familiar with the Graph API, we'll kind of go through that, but you will need that. If you're going to run this and put this into production, always make sure that you use a service account with the Power Automate. If you use it with a user's account, then what will happen is if that person leaves, that flow will stop, which you don't want. And lastly, if you're going to put this in place to govern your Teams creation process, then you're going to need to restrict Teams creation. So you can do that by only allowing people in a particular security group to create teams. Everybody else won't be able to create them. So you'll be forcing them to use this process. So the best thing to do with this really is just to show you a demo, just to show you how I've put this together. So step one, let's have a look at it from the end user. So what I've got here is I'm in Microsoft Teams as a user, and I've just created a really simple custom app whereby I've pinned this form onto that left-hand navigation bar, new team. That will then bring up that form. So it's a nice, easy place for everyone to actually find your new team creation process. So it's a basic form. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a team name. And I'm going to call this server upgrades. Project for the upgrade. We want it private team. It's going to be a type of project because I want to know whether it's a project-based team or an operational-based team. They're going to have different life cycles. A project-based team is going to be there for a relatively short period. An operational team, such as for marketing or sales, is going to be there for a long time. I also want to apply a sensitivity label to either allow guests in my team or to block guests in team. This particular form was written for kind of dual languages, so it's got English and French names on it, but you can have whatever your sensitivity labels are. This is just for the end user, so I want it internal. And how long do I want this team for? I say I'm going to want it for a year, so we'll do it for the end of next year. And I'm going to need a second owner. So let's copy in some details of an owner. And in this scenario, I want to collect some additional metadata as well. I'll maybe want some more information about the justification that the approver can see. And then submit. So from an end user, that's all that's going to happen. So it's a nice, simple process. What we're doing is we're going to stop them creating normal teams and they use this instead. It's a form. You can have any questions that you like, any wording you like. You're free to do what you like. So let's have a look from that end user what will happen. So let's have a look at, let's try and get rid of that. Get rid of that. Oh, sorry, that's better. So I've created a team, so it was server upgrades, but actually I've already got a team previously called server upgrades. So where you look, Mike Smith, and we're going to move across here at the bottom here, we can see the entry that I've added from Mike Smith. It's been rejected. It's a duplicate team name. You can see the date it's rejected, and that says the SharePoint URL already exists. So what do I see from that end user? So I should have received a notification, here we go, that project site has been rejected. So we're using a check, and it's saying, no, you can't have that team because that team name's already taken all the SharePoint site URL. So I need to go and request another team. So let's go through. I'm clicking through to the link. It should bring up that page again. Bear with me 2 seconds. So let's have another one. Let's have, we want to have a team all about we're going to plan ahead for a summer party. Party planning. Oh, can't spell. Never mind. We're going to put privacy. Again, we'll have it as a type of project. We only want it internal. Again, this one we'll say we only need it up until the end of August next year. Put a second owner in place. So I'm going to submit that. So again, it's a simple process that if it's been rejected, you can click through and add another one. So this I know is a unique name. So what happens now? So now we're going to look at the SharePoint list that's holding all the information. And we should have the entry at the bottom. For some reason it hasn't. Okay, bear with me 2 seconds. It always happens on a demo. actually running at the moment, so it should come through. Okay, so bear with me while that flow's going through. So let's have a look and see how this flow works while we're waiting for the approval to trigger. So what we've got here is we've got that form. So that's going to be the trigger for our Power Automate when that new response is submitted, and you link that to your form. Then the next step is you've got to pull that response details back. We want all of that information coming back as dynamic content from that form. Then what we need to do is we need to get some user profile information, because we're going to need that later. The first one is getting the details of the account flow. We need that because part of this process, when the team is created, the account that's running the flow will become the team owner. Now, we don't actually want the flow account to be the team owner of every single team. So we need to get the details so we can remove them as member later on at the end of the process. We get the requester information for the person submitting the flow. That person is going to be the first owner of the team. Then we need to get the user details for that second owner. So I put in Adele. So we need to pull back their information, and that will bring back all of their profile information. So we pull that information back. Then what's going to happen is we're going to initialize some variables that we need. The first one is I'm initializing a string, which is going to be a set of approvers that we'll set later on. Then what I want to do is I want to add in a team ID. Now, for the approvers, rather than hard code in a name of email addresses for the approval process, I'm going to say that all people, all members of a particular team are going to be approvers. So in that situation, we need to know what that team ID is. And we've hard coded that team ID there. So quickly, how do we find out what a team ID is? So if we go into a team, doesn't matter which team it is, you can select the 3 dots, get link to team. Now, you can look through in here, and the part after group ID equals this detail here between there and tenant ID. So those letters and numbers there, that is your group ID, your team ID. So that's the bit that we're going to need in our Power Automate flow. And see, I've copied that in there. Then we need to create a variable where we're going to store in a sensitivity label ID. And then the last thing is we're adding in that URL for the form. So where we went and said it was rejected, there was a button there to say put a new request in, and that's what that's doing. That's redirecting to the form so people can submit again. So we've set up a few variables, got some prerequisites in place. So now we can add that entry onto the team. So what we do here is we've created a list in a SharePoint site or within a team, wherever you want to have it. And then we need to map the information from that form onto your SharePoint list. So the team name we put on the form, we've got team name we've mapped, we had a description, so we'll map that in there. The justification, the privacy, the sensitivity and team type, all of that stuff we map in nice and easy. Now, one thing to know is when it comes to the duration, even though in the form I had a date picker and I select a date, when it's in Power Automate, it's not actually in a date format, which is rather frustrating. So you have to format it. Therefore, importantly, and I say it's all detailed in the blog, because what we've got to do here is rather than pick your dynamic content like you would do for all of the other items, we need to use an expression. So here we are. If I can look at this expression, we need the format date time expression. And then you enter in your date. That means that when it comes into the list, it's a date that can be searched and sorted by. I mean, I'm not using this duration for anything in the flow, but it's useful if you wanted to have some life cycle management governance steps or Power Automates later on. And then I'm taking information that I gathered earlier on, owner 2, so that was Adele. I've pulled back her details and I'm putting in her UPN here. The requester, I'm pulling in, showing the UPN there, and also I'm selecting the country of the user. So that's part of the profile, and it's an attribute stored in Azure AD, and it's the country because it's part of my process. I want to create a team name, and I want to add the country after the team name. So my team name is going to be in 3 parts. So my formatted team name is going to be whether it's the project or operational group dash team name dash country. So let's have a quick look back at that list to see what it looks like. Here we go. We can see project summer party here. So if I go in here, can't see it, project summer party. There we go. It's proj summer party dash UK. So I've actually formatted a team name. So I'm going to put in some governance controls on it to make it easier to see. It's on there. So you're pulling all of that information into the Power Automate. Then we'll initialize some more variables for the next part of the process. The first part is this var site domain. So this is the standard part of all SharePoint sites for your Teams creation. So it's going to be your domain.sharepoint.com, and it'll either be /sites or /teams, depending on how you've set it up in the SharePoint Admin Center. So that's the common part of your team URL. Then we want the next part of that URL. Well, that's going to be your formatted team name, which in this case was proj-summerparty-UK. And that was all formatted and concatenated in the list. Now, what you have to remember here is if your team name had any spaces in it, then that's not going to work for a URL. URLs can't have spaces. So what I'm doing here is I'm reformatting that team name and removing the spaces. So you use an expression and you're replacing, and basically you're pulling in that team name and the body of that team name, and you are replacing spaces. So that there you've got an apostrophe, space, apostrophe. So you're saying replace that, so that's space, and then comma, and then you just put 2 apostrophes next to each other. So basically you're removing the space. Because what we want in this next URL is to create what that SharePoint site URL for that team that will be. So we're taking the common part and then we're appending that team name to it. And we're going to use that string to check whether the team is a duplicate or not. The reason why I'm using a SharePoint URL to check for duplicates rather than the team name is that the team display name can have duplicates in it, and there's no real easy way in Power Automate to check things like the team ID or anything. So I thought, well, it's easier just to check the SharePoint site URL because you know you can only have one URL. It has to be unique. So let's go and check that as the kind of the duplicates check. So that's what this is going to be used for. And then lastly, I'm creating a URL, just a Boolean to say var team URL exists. It's going to be, does this URL already exist in my tenant? That's going to be our check. And it's going to be a true or a false. So let's have a quick look at how this duplicate check works. So strangely, I'm going to be using something called get lists. So get lists is an action that if you put in a SharePoint URL, it's going to pull back all SharePoint lists for that SharePoint site. But I don't need to know about the SharePoint list. So why am I using it? Well, this is quite a good trick to actually see if a URL exists. Because if the URL doesn't exist, this step is going to cause an error. It's going to fail this step. So what we can do is we can manage that failure and make the flow continue. A lot of people don't realise that actually you can control what happens with your flow. You can get your flow to continue as it does normally when each action step is successful, but you can also get your flow to continue if the step fails. So let me show you how to do this. So we're going to do a compose data action. And before we do anything, we need to select the 3 dots and importantly, configure after. And what we want to say is, I want this step to run whether the previous step is successful or has failed. So that's important. Now, you know when that's worked because you're going to get a little icon there. Once that has been put in place, what you can now do is enter in the status code of that previous step. So this is important. We need that status code back. You're likely to get 3 status codes being returned. Status code 200. That means the SharePoint site URL, which is that new one, the one that we're saying this will be the new URL for the team. So get lists, it'll come back 200 if that URL exists. There may or may not be any lists in that URL, but it exists. It's a duplicate. So status code 200 is a duplicate. You could get status code 400. It means the action failed because that URL does not exist. Aha, that's what we want. We want to know that that URL doesn't exist. It means it's unique and tick yes. We can create a team with that name. Or you may get status 403. So the step fails with 403. What that means is the SharePoint site URL exists, but the person running the flow does not have permissions to see the content of that flow. So therefore, you're not allowed to get lists because you don't have permissions to see it. I don't care really about the list. I want to know whether that site exists. 403 is a good code to me. It means that SharePoint site exists. It's a duplicate. So I've now got 3 potential outcomes. So what do? We create a switch. Status code equals 200. We're going to set that team's URL exists variable to true. 403, it exists, but you didn't have permission to view. It exists, we're going to set it to true. 404, this is the one which means the team name is unique. It doesn't exist. So we're going to set that URL to false. So we've now done our check. Does the team site URL exist? Yes or no. So we've set that variable. So we've got that condition now. Does that team exist variable equals false? If it means it's false, it's unique, we can continue with the process. Well, what happens if it's true? What we're going to do? So what we've done is we've just done a rejection. We're going to update the SharePoint site. So I showed you that where it had been updated, it said it was rejected. And we're just putting in here, approval status rejected. I'm picking up the date of when the form was completed as the approval date and some comments. I've just hard coded that in. And importantly, I've posted an adaptive card to that end user as a chat from the Flowbot. And I've picked the JSON as a good site that you can go to for the adaptive cards, JSONs, and then you can design your content, add in your dynamic content there. So that's what's there. I have put in here, if you want to an action, request a new team, you can actually go back and recomplete the form again. That's what that button was down at the bottom. So that's your it did not work. It's a duplicate. But we're interested in what happens if it's a unique URL, then we can continue. Next step is we're going to create the approval and send it to a group of approvers. Well, my group of approvers are in a particular team. So remember, we hard coded, we set that variable with that team ID. What I need now is to get all of that members in that team or group. So there's the variable. We're using list group members. We found that team ID, we pasted it in that variable, and we're using that variable there. This step is going to pull back a list of all members of that team. So that's going to be my approver group. Then what I need to do is I now need to append each one of those members in turn to a variable. And this variable is going to have their mail, so their email address, semicolon. So it's a list of email addresses with semicolons that we will use in the next step. So that will do a for each step, because members, there's like to be one or more members of that group. So for every member, it's going to append it to that variable. So that's going to give me a list of all my approvers. Then we're going to use a standard approval process step. So here we go. We want approve, reject, first to respond. We don't want everybody to have to approve it for it to be approved. We just want one person. We're pulling in that list of our approvers. So that's the list of all of those members of the team that are in that semicolon delimited file. And then you can put your details, any text you want, any dynamic content in. So that's now going to go off, and it's going to trigger an approval process, and it's going to wait until you get a response. So what we now need to do is handle the two responses that come out. They're either going to be approved or rejected. So condition, outcome equals approved. So if it's approved, we're going to continue. If it's rejected, well, what do we do? If it's rejected, the persons who requested the team will know it's rejected, because the approval process will send a rejection response back. All we need to do in that scenario is I'm going to update that SharePoint list. So we've just got an audit of what happened. So the information down here about the approval process, the status, the date, and the approval comments is all come from dynamic content out of that approval process. That will put all of that in there. But the important part is, how are we now going to create our team? So create a team step. So yes, there's one of those already in Power Automate, nice and easy. So my team name in here, this is my final team name. This is where I concatenated the project name, which was the code proj dash my team name, which was summer party dash, and then I'm taking my user's country, which is dash UK. And that's all created as part of the list process. You don't need to formulate that in the flow. You can do that manipulation within SharePoint lists relatively easily. You paste in the description. That's all you need to do just to create a very basic team. Then once the team is created, what I want to do is I want to update my list to say that it's been created, and just to put in the team ID into my list. So I'm having to put ID and title in here because they're mandatory. So I'm just mapping them back onto their existing fields. I'm not updating them. Now I'm pulling in all of the information about the approvers again. This time it's going to say it's approved, who approved it, the date, any approver comments. But also importantly, look, I'm pulling in that new team ID. So I've got that list of what's happening. Then importantly, add in a delay step. I've added in a delay just for a few minutes, a couple of minutes. If you don't do that, the next step is likely to fail because it's not going to be able to find that new team ID. It takes a little bit of time in that back end processing. So put a delay in. If you still find it's failing, just up that limit. I found that 2 minutes seems to work okay. Then what we're going to do is I want to add in a sensitivity label. So at the beginning of the process, in that form, we said, do you want to have a team with a sensitivity label that was internal and external? Do you want to have guests? Basically, yes or no. But that information, a text word, a display name is not good enough. I need to know what the actual IDs are for the sensitivity labels. So what I need to do is I need to work out what these IDs are. So I put sensitivity label equals to internal dash internee. So I'm saying if it's yes, then I'm going to set the sensitivity label. Now, there's one part of this flow that I couldn't get to where I couldn't actually go and find out what the ID is of that sensitivity label. So what I need to do is you would need to run PowerShell, the Exchange get label command, to actually pull back all the sensitivity labels of your tenant. They're the ones that not only you add on to containers such as teams, groups and sites, but also ones for files as well. Find the ones that you want to use, the container-based ones. And you have to actually then hard code that in here. So again, it's in the blog if you need to know the details, but that's the only part of this whole process where you need to run a little bit of PowerShell to get out these two IDs. So what it's doing is going to set this variable to either that value, which is going to be add the internal label, or add the external label. So it's just creating that ID. Then this is where the sort of the magic happens, I think, really with Power Automate. The HTTP requests are in preview and they're new. You can use them to send Graph API commands to either groups, or there's an equivalent one you can do for users. That means suddenly you've extended the scope of Power Automate. You can do lots of other commands that are not available out of the box. And importantly, these are now available with your standard Power Automate. Before, if you needed to do custom connectors and various other things, you had to have the premium licenses. This is standard. So what I've done here is I want to add that sensitivity label. So basically what this URI is saying is I want to have and look at groups with this group ID. So it's my new team ID. And I'm going to do a patch. So basically a patch is an update. And this is the body. This is my JSON body. And it's saying assigned labels. I want to assign my sensitivity label. It's called assigned labels. And here's my label ID. That's the unique ID. So that was the variable I've set. So that is going to then update that group and do a patch and add that sensitivity label in. Then the last steps are we need to add the owners to the team. I've just broken this out just for simplicity. You can have 1 to n owners. I've just got 2. You could have 5. You may say I don't want the requester to be the owner, but the process is all the same. I want to add the requester as a team owner, so it's add member to the team action, add my team. Right at the beginning, we got all the user profiles. So this is the UPN for the requester, the person who submitted the form. Important. Select show actions. Should the newly added user be an owner? Make sure you tick yes, otherwise they're just going to be added as a member to the team. That second person I added in the form, Adele. Adele is going to be the second owner. We got her profile as well. Again, put the team ID in, make sure you set that to a yes. So that's now added the person who's requested the team in the form and the second person that they put on the form as owners. Add in another short delay here. And then the very final steps are we have to remove that flow account as both owner of the group and member of the group. As part of this process, that create team automatically puts that flow owner as flow account as owner. We don't want that. So let's look at these last 2 steps. We're using First of all, remove the user as owner of the group. This is another HTTP command. So we're going to say for the group that equals the team ID, and for the owners that equal, and this ID here, that's the ID of the account that's running the flow. And we want to delete. So what we're saying is we're going to delete this user of owner of this team. That's what that step does. Then that person is still a member. We've now got to do another step, the last step, to remove that flow account as the member. There's a standard action for that, remove member of group. So you just put in team and the URL there. So that's the flow. So let's quickly go back. Let's cancel that. Let's look at the actions. So this is the approval request, so that we came through for the new team. So this is the one that was unique. So we saw the one that where it was duplicate, you got a rejection. This time it's a unique one, so the approval step is fired. We've got this team name that's been put here. We've got some information that we've pulled from that form. You can put anything you like. We can do approved, and we'll go off, and that will be then approved. You've got a list of all your approvals. This is a standard list, so there will be other approval requests in here. This is just the standard approval. It's not just for teams. So let's look now at my information. Here's my team, my summer party team with the formatted name. You've got the details here of it. It's private, it's internal, it's a project. I've created a code here, project. And for this one, it's looking up. So it says if team type equals project, add PROJ. It will say if team type equals operational, put op in there. So you can put whatever you like. So I'm creating a code out of information people put in. I've captured a date. So say I'm not doing anything with this date, but I've just got it there just in case I want to do some governance processes ongoing. I can see who the owners are. And then I can see who's the approver. So it went to me, I approved it, I put some text in, and the team has been created. Look, it's pulled back the information there to create the team. Well, let's have a look and see if the process has finally finished. It may not have done. Let's have a look. So back as Mike, I've now got a response back to say my request has been approved. And then what have I got here? That was my first one. Let's go and have a look and see if my team's been created. Not yet, it's still being created, but let's have a quick look at one that I created earlier. So here was a team that I created, and you can see up here it's added in my sensitivity label here, and that's a sensitivity label that won't allow me to add guests. So let's quickly go back and do a recap. So that's kind of the top level process. So let's recap on what we've done. We had a form, so you can create a form with all your data entry information. I was enforcing multiple owners. I'm collecting other metadata about my team. Then you create a list, and that's going to store all of that information on the form and have the attributes needed to run that Power Automate. Then the Power Automate, first of all, does the duplication check. If the team's a duplicate, it's going to send a rejection to the user. If the URL is unique, then it triggers that approval process. If the approval is approved, then it goes on, creates the team, adds the sensitivity label, adds the owner, removes that flow account as owner of the team, and then updates the list. So you've got then that list becomes kind of your central kind of auditing. You can have a look and you can use that then for ongoing other activities for your governance. So up in that top there, that QR code, if you want to take a picture of that, that will take you to my blog, nikkichapple.com, where I've just posted up all the details, the step-by-step instructions of how to actually do that. So just any questions? So just go on. Any questions for anyone?